The evening started like any other busy night at the well-known restaurant where Lena worked. The place always looked bright, warm, and full of life. Soft lights hung above each table, and the sound of quiet music played in the background. Guests talked, laughed, and enjoyed their meals. Lena moved around calmly, balancing trays, taking orders, and helping whoever needed her. She wasn't the type to draw attention. She spoke softly, smiled politely, and focused on her work without making noise or excuses. Many people didn't even notice her, but those who did always said she had a peaceful presence. That night, one group stood out from the rest. A group of well-dressed guests walked in with a wealthy businessman named Mr. Grant. He was known in the city for his money, his loud voice, and his habit of showing off every chance he got. He liked to be the center of attention, even if it meant putting someone else down. His guests were from out of town, visiting for a business meeting, and he wanted to impress them with the best food, the best service, and the feeling that he owned the place. The moment he walked in, the atmosphere shifted slightly. He laughed too loudly, pointed at decorations, and acted like the restaurant was his personal property. Lena noticed, but didn't react. She simply straightened her apron, took a deep breath, and approached their table with the same gentle smile she used for everyone. "Good evening," she said quietly. "Welcome. How may I help you today?" Mr. Grant looked at her and smirked as though he had already found something amusing about her. Before she could finish her sentence, he interrupted her loudly. "Tell me," he said, leaning back in his chair, "do you even know anything about expensive wine?" Some of the guests looked uncomfortable, but they didn't say anything. They just shifted in their seats, unsure where the conversation was going. Lena stayed calm and answered respectfully, describing the wine list and explaining their popular choices. She spoke clearly, keeping her tone professional. But Mr. Grant pushed more. He asked questions that weren't real questions, ones meant to make her look small or uneducated. He laughed at his own remarks as if they were harmless jokes. His guests forced smiles, not wanting to upset him. Lena didn't let her smile fade. She focused on doing her job, understanding that some customers liked controlling the situation. After she took their drink orders and walked away, one guest leaned toward another and whispered, "That wasn't necessary." The other guest nodded quietly. They both looked toward Lena with sympathy. When she returned with the wine, the situation only got worse. Mr. Grant made another joke, this time about how she carried the bottles. "Careful," he said loudly. "I don't want you dropping something you can't afford to replace." The guests forced another round of awkward laughter. Lena simply nodded and poured the wine with steady hands. She had been trained well, and she wasn't going to let someone ruin her focus or her dignity. That she stepped back from the table. Mr. Grant looked around and spoke even louder, trying to entertain his guests. "You know," he said, pointing toward the corner of the restaurant, "there's a piano over there. It's just for decoration. No one here knows how to use it, not even the staff." He laughed again, proud of himself. Some guests looked at the piano, then at Lena, and then back at him, unsure how to respond. The joke didn't make much sense, but it was clear he wasn't trying to be funny. He was trying to show power. Lena stayed silent, keeping her expression neutral, but something in her eyes shifted for a moment, a tiny flicker that most people would miss. One guest noticed it though. He watched the way she glanced at the piano, almost like she held a small memory or connection to it. She left the table again to bring menus. As she walked away, the rich businessman said another comment meant to embarrass her. "Honestly, I doubt she even knows what a music note is. People like that don't learn such things." The guests exchanged uncomfortable looks again. They weren't enjoying his attitude, but they also didn't want to challenge him. It was clear he was used to being the loudest voice in the room. The restaurant manager, a calm older man who knew all his staff well, had been watching from a distance. He approached Lena quietly to check on her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I'm fine," she whispered. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to complete her shift with dignity. The manager knew Lena wasn't just a good worker. She had something special in her, something she rarely showed anyone. He had seen it only once, late at night after closing, but he respected her privacy and never mentioned it. As Lena walked back toward the table with dessert menus, he heard one of the guests saying, "The piano looks beautiful. It adds such a nice feel to the place. I wonder if someone here can actually play it." Mr. Grant couldn't resist responding. "Definitely not the staff," he said loudly. "They probably think it's just a big piece of furniture." He laughed loudly again, almost proud of how rude he was being. Lena reached the table just in time to hear that. She placed the menus gently and stood with her hands folded. One guest looked at her kindly and asked softly, "Do you play the piano?" Mr. Grant burst into laughter so loud that a few people at nearby tables turned their heads. He said, pointing at Lena. Play the piano. She can't even walk straight with a tray. This should be good. Lena wasn't offended. She didn't shrink or blush or freeze. She simply looked at the guest who asked the question and replied with quiet honesty, I can play. A little. Her voice was so calm that the guests paused. They weren't expecting that answer. Mr. Grant nearly spilled his drink, laughing again. Oh, this I have to see, he said, waving his hand dramatically. Go ahead. Play something. Let's make the night interesting. The guest who had asked wasn't mocking her. He genuinely wanted to know. He gave her a small nod, encouraging her. Only if you're comfortable, he added gently. Lena looked at him, then at the piano. She stood still for a few seconds, thinking. She had never played in front of a full restaurant. She had never tried to show her talent to strangers. Music was private for her, a part of her heart. She kept hidden because it reminded her of someone she lost long ago. But tonight, something inside her felt different. Maybe it was the constant humiliation from Mr. Grant. Maybe it was the manager watching from the corner with quiet support. Maybe she wanted to prove to herself more than anyone that she wasn't what Mr. Grant thought she was. She took a slow breath, placed the menus neatly on the table, and whispered, I'll try. The entire group turned toward the piano. A few nearby tables noticed and became curious. Lena walked across the restaurant, her steps steady and calm even as her heartbeat picked up. She reached the piano and paused for a moment, placing her fingers lightly on the edge of the instrument. She looked down at the keys with a gentle expression, like someone greeting an old friend. The restaurant grew quiet, not completely silent, but quiet enough that the mood changed. People sensed something was about to happen, and Lena, the quiet waitress nobody noticed, sat down slowly, ready to reveal a part of herself no one expected. The moment Lena sat at the piano, the entire energy of the restaurant shifted. It was almost strange how someone so quiet, someone who blended into the background just moments earlier, suddenly became the center of every gaze. She didn't intend to draw attention, yet her calm posture and gentle presence made people look without being asked. Her fingers hovered above the keys, not touching them yet. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, breathing slowly, as though she was remembering something from a distant past. The guests at Mr. Grant's table watched closely. Some leaned forward, others held their breath. Even the manager stood still in the corner, his hands folded, knowing what was coming but still moved by the moment. Mr. Grant, however, was still smiling arrogantly. He didn't expect much. To him this was nothing more than a joke. He whispered something to the guests beside him, and both laughed under their breath. But the rest of the table stayed quiet, almost protective of Lena, hoping she wouldn't feel discouraged. Lena finally placed her fingers on the keys. They rested lightly at first, as if she was letting the piano get used to her touch. The restaurant lights reflected softly on the smooth surface of the instrument. For a second, she didn't move. Then, with a deep breath, she pressed down the first note. It was soft, gentle, and warm. The sound floated into the air like a small ripple spreading across water. Then another note followed, then another, and the ripple grew into something bigger, deeper, richer. The melody slowly began to take shape, and the moment it did, the restaurant fell completely silent. People nearby stopped chewing. Forks froze in midair. Conversations died down naturally without being forced. The waiters standing near the kitchen door slowly leaned in, confused but intrigued. It wasn't often something stopped the entire room like this. Lena wasn't just playing. She was telling a story through each note, one that didn't need words. Her hands moved gracefully, confidently. Every sound she created was filled with emotion, the kind that came from real experience and honest memories. She wasn't performing to impress anyone. She was simply pouring her heart into the keys, expressing feelings she never spoke out loud. Her music grew stronger, rising gently like a soft wave, then calming again like quiet rain. The melody was full of warmth but carried a hint of sadness, like someone who had learned to smile despite everything. People listened with deep attention, and some even felt chills. No one had expected this, not from someone who had been serving water and cleaning tables just minutes earlier. One of the guests at Mr. Grant's table whispered, "This is beautiful." Another nodded slowly, unable to take their eyes off Lena. They had never seen such confidence in her before. The quiet waitress they barely noticed turned into someone unforgettable the second she touched the keys. Even the chefs peeked out from the kitchen door. The music traveled through every corner of the restaurant, filling the space with something almost magical. Tables farther away, which didn't even see what started it, turned toward the sound, trying to find who was responsible for the melody. The manager stood with a proud smile. though a soft sadness touched his eyes. He knew Lena didn't come from an easy life. He had seen her late at night, once, playing when she thought no one was watching. That night, she played a song so emotional that he had quietly stepped away to give her privacy. From that moment on, he understood that she wasn't just a waitress, she was someone carrying a story deeper than most would ever know. Meanwhile, Mr. Grant's smile slowly faded. At first he looked confused, then he straightened in his seat. His eyebrows narrowed as though he couldn't understand what was happening. This wasn't a joke anymore. This wasn't something to laugh at or make fun of. This was real talent he didn't expect from someone he underestimated. His guests noticed the change on his face. One of them glanced at him with a hint of satisfaction. For the first time that night, the loudest man at the table had nothing to say. As the melody softened again, Lena's shoulders relaxed, and her expression softened as if she was remembering someone important. The soft lights of the restaurant reflected a faint shine in her eyes. She wasn't looking at anyone, she wasn't performing for applause. She was simply expressing a piece of her heart she had kept hidden for too long. Then she moved into the second part of the piece, which felt lighter, more hopeful. Her hands flowed smoothly from one note to the next, almost like her fingers were dancing. She played with confidence, but there was still a tenderness in her touch that made the music feel safe. A woman sitting at a nearby table wiped her eyes without embarrassment. A young boy across the room leaned his chin on his hands, listening like he was watching magic unfold. Even an elderly man at the back closed his eyes and swayed slightly, letting the music remind him of something from years ago. This wasn't just talent, it was connection. The restaurant, once filled with noise, now held only her melody and the quiet breaths of people who didn't want to miss a moment. When Lena reached the final part of the song, her movements slowed, her fingers pressing the keys with gentle care. The notes softened like dusk settling at the end of the day. The music didn't end suddenly, it faded gently, as if giving everyone a moment to hold on to it just a little longer, and then, with the final soft note, she lifted her fingers and let them rest on her lap. The restaurant stayed completely silent for a few seconds. No one wanted to break the moment. Then, as if waking from a dream, the entire room erupted into applause. People clapped loudly, some even standing. The sound filled the air like thunder, but a warm, joyful kind. Lena looked down, clearly not used to such attention. Her cheeks warmed, and she smiled shyly, feeling overwhelmed but grateful. The guests at Mr. Grant's table clapped the hardest except for Mr. Grant himself. He sat still, staring at Lena with wide eyes and a complicated expression. He wasn't angry. He wasn't annoyed. He was stunned, truly stunned. His face showed something he rarely felt: embarrassment. Here was a woman he tried to belittle, a woman he assumed had no talent, no education, no story, and she had just given the entire room a moment none of them would forget. One of his own guests leaned toward him and whispered, "I think she's more talented than any of us expected." It wasn't meant as an insult, but Mr. Grant took it personally. He knew it was directed at him. Lena stood up slowly. She didn't bow or make a dramatic gesture. She simply nodded politely and walked back toward the table, trying not to look overwhelmed by the applause. She approached. The guests at the table looked at her with newfound respect. One of them placed a hand over his heart and said, "That was incredible." Another added softly, "Thank you for sharing that." Truly. Lena smiled gently, unsure what to say. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it. To her, music was simply a part of who she was, not something she used to impress anyone. Mr. Grant cleared his throat loudly, still trying to regain control of the situation. "Well," he said, forcing a laugh, "that was surprising," but his voice didn't carry the same confidence anymore. The arrogance he wore like armor had cracked, and everyone at the table saw it. Lena set their menus down carefully and replied with the same calm tone she had from the beginning. "Thank you," she said simply. Her polite answer made the moment even heavier. No showing off, no pride, no revenge, just quiet dignity. For the first time, Mr. Grant didn't have a comeback. She stepped back from the table to let them choose their desserts. And as she walked away, the guests exchanged looks. They weren't thinking about the food anymore. They were thinking about what they had just witnessed and how wrong Mr. Grant had been about her. The night wasn't over yet. Part 3 would reveal how the businessman deals with his embarrassment, what he learns about Lena's past, and how the evening changes him more than he expected.